Hello and a very good morning. Few other IT systems are as widespread as the humble database, but companies have often been locked in to a single vendor for many years. But the spread of open source throughout IT is increasing innovation, agility, and security in many different tool sets, including databases. And Postgres is one of the most popular open source database management systems available today, with decades of development behind it. But despite that legacy, few people really understand the power of Postgres and open source more generally. I'm Leonard, I'm Research Director at Computing, and I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Riggs, Postgres Fellow at Enterprise DB and a major contributor to Postgres over many years. In the next 40 minutes or so, we'll be discussing issues such as what are the advantages of adopting open source databases? How can Postgres help you to achieve your business goals? And what support can you expect from the community and from companies like EDB? Now, I'm one of those rather strange people who find databases fascinating, having covered them in all their rich variety for a number of years. And I have lots of questions of my own for Simon. However, I'd much rather put your questions to him, so please do put them into the questions tag as soon as possible. Simon assures me that he's an old hand, so he should be able to handle anything you care to throw at him. So feel free to pitch in a few Googles if you like. So, Simon, welcome. Perhaps before we get going, you could give us a bit of background about yourself. But before even that, perhaps you could answer my first question, which is it Postgres or Postgres? Because to be honest, I've never known.
Well, a lot of people call the project different things. The official name of the project is now the PostgreSQL project, and we do actually have a sound sample to let you know how to say that, but in fact more people still call it Postgres because that's the name that you see when you look at a terminal when you're running the code. Now Postgres, the main thing is for me is it's an international project, and you can really say that however you like in your language and locale, and we're not really fussed. We're just happy that you're using the product, right? So background on me. I am getting a little bit grey these days, but been working professionally with databases for 35 years. I was a database architect at a major bank when I got involved in Postgres, and I've now been involved for 18 years. At this point, 50% of my career has been in Postgres, but the good thing really is that I had a life before that, and that meant that I do know other databases and I appreciate how they work, and so we're sort of bringing that experience to the project.
Okay, great. So Postgres, I think, goes back well into the 90s, into the early 90s.
Yeah.
Open source is now the de facto way of developing software, of course, but it did take some time to be accepted. Why do you think that databases in particular were among the first open source applications to be successful?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably one of the most visible pieces of technology, but obviously in order for us to be successful, we needed open source operating systems, mailing lists, websites. So there was already quite a lot of infrastructure around before databases. So I wouldn't want to claim too much credit for being early there. I think it's just that there's quite a lot of infrastructure tools that are sort of below the radar, and they were first, and then came system tools like databases. So yeah, we've been around a long time, but it has also taken a long time to get the database to true enterprise readiness, and that's really what's happened in the last 10 years. So.
Okay, and within that time, there's been a lot of disruption in the world of databases, of course. So a few years back, it was rather a staid world, if you like, and it was kind of turned upside down by the arrival of NoSQL in the shape of CouchDB, Redis, MongoDB, and others. So what was it like at the time being known as a relational database, when all these sort of hip new young things were all coming up?
Yeah. Well, the reason I say Postgres is because the name of the project actually comes from the concept that this was a post-relational product. And so relational databases for me are things that happened in the 80s, and Postgres is advancing beyond that. So when people said, oh, there's something wrong with relational, we should do more, our attitude was, yeah, we're doing it. This is the more, right? So when we saw NoSQL come along, I mean, a lot of what they said was very reasonable, and we agreed with that. For example, using JSON, for example, or document style data is a very good idea, and we immediately added that to Postgres. It really didn't take long at all to adapt that. Is SQL a great language? Well, I think there's something that always divides people. It is a bit like Marmite. Some people love it, some people hate it. I think it's brilliant because you can express what you want to achieve without exactly having to say how, which is so difficult when you're working with data to truly express what you're trying to do. And if you have to express exactly how at the same time, it becomes much more difficult. So SQL is pretty good, but I can understand people saying bad things about it. But I think what's happened after the NoSQL event is that Postgres has become even more popular because we've adopted JSON and document store techniques. And also people have realized that SQL actually is pretty good. It's not the best thing that anyone could imagine, but it is a standard technology that is worldwide now. And I think that's a powerful thing to have that level of standardization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if your adoption of some of those techniques, artifacts, whatever, that you mentioned was a result of the NoSQL revolution.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, our attitude was, we're open source. We will take good ideas from wherever they come. I mean, if people criticize Postgres, then sometimes people suggest things to Postgres and they mean it in a very polite and beneficial way. And sometimes people criticize it very badly, but it doesn't matter because good ideas come to the project, right? It doesn't matter, the intent of the speaker when they had a good idea. We'll still take that good idea and do something with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And presumably this is an ongoing process. I mean, there are so many different sorts of databases now. You have analytical, transactional, in-memory, NoSQL, NewSQL, time series, event streaming, graph, distributed, Y-column, blah, 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 blah. So can one database be truly multimodal or multimodal? And is this something that you're aiming for, or is this just a byproduct of your adapting to the audience's needs?
Yeah, well, I would say we definitely can. There's a lot of work really done by the founder of this project, Michael Stonebreaker, showing that there are distinct benefits from having specific architectural designs for different use cases. And I completely agree with that. What we've done with the Postgres project is realized that the core of any database is a set of libraries that you need for data management, memory management, caching, IO, that kind of thing. And if you put all of that together, yes, the architecture required to address each use case is radically different, but 60 or 80% of the code can be the same. And so what we have done is put together a system that is pluggable at various levels in the system, and that allows you to have pluggable data types, a pluggable executor, a pluggable optimizer, and things like that. And taking all of that together, we can address each of the different use cases using the core of Postgres. And so if I say it's one product, I think that's kind of stretching the definition of product, but it's more a product framework So we see it, Postgres now, as a framework product into which you can clip other pieces of technology to address all of these use cases. So I do believe it's possible to address all of those use cases with PostgreSQL.
Okay, great stuff. In a sec, if I may, I'll sort of ask about the relationship between the Postgres community and EDB.
Sure.
And what you're doing there. First, another quick call for questions. As I mentioned, I have an absolute armload of whatever the correct statement is of questions. I have that, but I'd much rather put your questions to Simon. So please do get them in. Okay, so EDB takes the time-honored route in open source, which is contributing to the community code base and offering proprietary add-ons as well, and chargeable services. I say time-honored, but of course, many open source companies have tried this and failed. EDB seems to be an exception. So what has EDB done right, do you think, in this case?
Well, I think it's important to stay close to the open source version. I think if you have an open source edition and then an enterprise edition, and then you end up sort of differing massively between the two, then people can see that and they leave. Whereas I think what EDB has done is, yes, it's had an enterprise edition, but the open source edition has been fully supported, expanded. We've spent a lot of time making the community successful, and that's really what has made Postgres the success it is. So I don't think EDB would claim all of the credit for that, but we've certainly been completely pivotal in making that happen.
And is there any tension ever between EDB and the maintainers of the community version? I mean, having tracked a number of open source projects, I know that there's a lot of creative tension, if you like, and sometimes that spills over into outright. So do you find that sort of thing, and how do you handle it? When that happens.
Let me. I mean, yes, I think there is tension, and I think it's right that there is tension, because I think in any organization, oversight of that organization is important, and so people watching what one company does and potentially objecting to what people do is absolutely important. It's like in any parliament, for example, there's always opposing views. Now, that doesn't mean there's a problem in the parliament. It just means that things need to be debated, and if something looks like it's being done for the wrong reasons, then people will block that. And I think that's absolutely right. So I don't think anyone would deny that there are tensions, but I see that as a good thing. I mean, the main thing about open source, in my view, is that it's open engineering. You've got to let the information out, you've got to let the thoughts out and the discussion, so that we can get proper rational debate about what people should do next. And if there's always some business guy that says, hey, just say this, and you've got to go, no, we're rational here, we're going to do things for good reasons, and that's really what the project sticks to over a long period of time. And that's certainly why I'm involved over such a long period, is that the project is rational. Your voice can be heard, and sensible things come out of that.
Okay. Many of the proprietary add-ons for databases tend to be around security, because obviously enterprise security is a complex issue. This is something that can make things easier. Is it actually plausible, if you have the right know-how, do you think, to have enterprise level security using only the community version of the database?
Well, I think it's not just possible. I think it's actually one of the leading ways now to do security is the many eyeballs approach. So there is a very active security team on the Postgres project, and when people make reports to that security team, those reports are reviewed and fixed, often in real time. We can't always release new versions of the software quickly, but we can prepare to do so. And so I think it is extremely credible that people can use the open source edition. So EDB supports the open source edition. I think that's worth mentioning very strongly. I think the fact that there's a sort of enterprise edition might make people think that the open source edition isn't important to EDB. That's not true at all. Probably half to 2/3 of our customers use the open source edition. So it's one of the strongest lines of business there. So and security is extremely important. It's probably the number one issue now facing enterprises, and it drives many of the other things that happen. For example, the need to upgrade is particularly important capability in modern databases.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So there are other databases, other open source databases that go back almost as long as Postgres does. So why do you think that organizations choose Postgres over, for example, MySQL or other alternatives?
Well, I think the rational approach that I talked about before comes out in the design of Postgres. It makes sense. We don't allow new features to go in that like look strange or have surprising behavior, and that sort of common sense approach to the product is appreciated by developers because it just doesn't surprise people, which is never a good thing to be surprised by the way a product operates. But Postgres is also completely robust, and I think that's really the number one thing that people would say is, we don't backpatch strange features into stable editions. We treat security and data loss as the number one things that we must fix. And we make sure that all of the functionality that we provide gives the exactly correct answer. There was something a couple of years ago where somebody detected quite a small error in one of the floating point routines, and it was something like 6 decimal places of error. But we went and fixed it anyway because some scientists were using it, and that level of error was catastrophic to them. Whereas in a lot of places that type of error would be so small it wouldn't matter, but we fixed it, and rightly so. So people appreciate that level of diligence, really.
So as there are these other open source databases, thinking MySQL, MariaDB, do you ever sort of trade ideas with them? Did you ever sort of borrow functionality from them, or are you very much going your own separate path with your own distinct audiences?
Well, I can't tell whether people borrow ideas from those other databases. I mean, I hope not, because they've got a GPL license, but I don't know of anything that we've ever done where we borrowed ideas from them. I mean, to be honest, I think it's the other way around. I think people read ideas on the Postgres mailing list and suddenly new features appear in various other products. So I think over the course of my 18 years involvement, I've quite often looked through the feature set of other products, whether that be Sybase or DB2 or MySQL or whatever. And as I'm looking down the list, I go, "Oh, that's funny. We had that in the last release. Oh, and so's this." And as you look down the list, you kind of get typically dozens of small things that people got from Postgres as good ideas. And that's also because what happens in open source is that we get lots of small ideas and we put them into the product. So typically we'll get hundreds of new features, maybe small ones, but they're all ones suggested by real world developers, right? Whereas some of the bigger products, they've got a product manager and they've got like 6 big new features in it, but they don't have the small things that actually please the users.
Okay, good stuff. So which database management systems do Postgres, EDB, tend to displace, sort of going wider than the open source world.
Yeah, well, I think 10 or 20 years ago, Oracle was the market leader in databases, and they charged a lot of money for that. And by charging a lot of money, they created huge pressure amongst their user base to move away from Oracle. So EDB has been leading that charge, moving people away from Oracle for years now. People move away to the EDB advanced server, but also to open source Postgres. So by far the largest group of people is people that used Oracle moving to Postgres, but there's a lot of other people as well. There's a lot of other old databases that are gradually closing their doors, and people move over to Postgres. So that's really across the whole industry, really, is a sort of general trend towards Postgres.
But not from the Microsoft stack, I guess, because that's a completely different ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's a very well integrated stack, and you can't really just move the database. You probably need to move other technologies as well. So yeah, we don't tend to have people moving from that stack, but we do have people that will completely change the architecture of their application top to bottom. And when they do that, they're quite likely to put Postgres in that as a choice.
Okay, let's had our first audience questions in. What are the new features and services that are up and coming in Postgres that we should know about?
So we're lucky enough to say that we're 1 week away from the release of Postgres 14. So it'll be generally available on the 30th of September. I think it could be put back if there are bugs, but that's the likely date. So we've got a raft of new features in there, really. I've got a whole page of things talking about performance, partitioning enhancements, new information views for monitoring and control. I've got different types of thing to do with logical replication and security. One that I'll mention is quite interesting, is the search and the cycle clause has been added to SQL. Now, it was already possible to write graph queries with SQL within Postgres, and we've made that even simpler now with the addition of a couple of SQL standard commands. So there's a whole range of different things, whether they're for application developers or for DBAs. So I've got a whole page of notes. So if anybody's got any questions about that, I can go into more detail.
Okay, great. If you do have questions, please put them into the questions box there for Simon. You mentioned that sometimes Postgres displaces old databases, like Sybase or whatever. Do databases ever really go out of date? I mean, you hear about banks and etc. sort of still operating on 30-year-old systems, for example.
Yeah, well, my experience
sometimes because of the database, basically.
Yeah, I mean, when I worked at the bank, and that was like at this point, sort of 15, 16 years ago, there were systems that had been there for 30 years, and frankly, some of those systems might kind of still be there for that long into the future, because the reality is that large enterprises now don't just have a couple of databases; they might have somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 databases somewhere in their organization, and you simply can't replace those quickly. If you think about it, it might take a month to replace a system, and you've got 8,000 systems to replace. That's a lot of months. So even if you do 10 at a time, it'll still be 800 months to replace all of that. And you can see that some of those things will be there almost forever. So 20 or 30 years is not unexpected lifespan. But the problem is that's totally unsupported at that point. There's nobody that supports software that old. So.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, that's the advantage of the open source model. Where you have so many contributors, so many people that do understand what's going on and are able to turn their hand to things. So, how many people are there in the core Postgres team out of interest? How many committers,
Sure.
contributors, commentators, whatever?
Yeah, so there's 7 members of the core team, and the core team are responsible really for setting the guidelines by which the rest of the community operates. Um, the main discussion about Postgres takes place on the hackers list, and the hackers list has got about 2,500 people on that mailing list. So people from all over contribute to that. But the code that is submitted to that mailing list is pushed into the core of Postgres, pushed into the repository by a team that we call the committers, because they have the commit rights on the repository. Now, the commit bit, as we call it, is carefully controlled. So these people are experienced, dedicated, and long-lived, in the sense of, they've been contributing for many years, and that's quite important. And there are 28 committers. So if you think there's 2,500 people reading the mailing list, but only 28 people committing code to the repository. So there's quite a tight quality funnel on that. So we don't commit every piece of code that gets submitted, far from it. It's quite hard to get a contribution accepted. But having said that, the last version of Postgres, version 13, had 380 named contributors. So if you take that back across 25 years of the open source project, we've easily got more than 1,000 individual contributors, and it might be, twice or 3 times that. I've not actually counted that. But these people come from all over the world, Russia, China, Japan, South America, Africa, as well as, North America and Europe. Sorry, missed Australia there. Don't wasn't meaning to exclude anyone. I was really trying to say, everybody in the world contributes to Postgres.
I think you just about got them in within the allotted time window, so
Yeah.
you're okay. Are there certain skills which are hard to find when you're developing something as complex as a database? You say it's a fairly tight funnel.
Yeah.
Is that because there's only a few people that know, or is it because the control is necessary to ensure quality, or maybe both?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, I think it's important to have quite tight control over what goes into the code. And that means that we have quite an extensive review process, which is open, and lots of people contribute to. So I think the hardest thing to get is people that understand databases. Now, there are many, many people that do that, but obviously getting time from those people is relatively hard. But I think we do quite well on that. So we have contributions from quite a lot of people that run real world production systems, and they'll spend a little bit of time saying, looks like you got that wrong, or this could be improved in this way. For example, the incremental sort feature that was added to Postgres 14 actually came from somebody that I'd worked with, that was trying to tune their own systems, and decided actually that it would be sensible and possible to improve the way that we did sorting, and so he's contributed a lot of time into making that a reality, and because of his contribution, other developers with committers and more experienced people on the Postgres code base have helped him. So it wasn't a one-person effort. It took knowledge of the application's needs and what might be possible in sort of computer science, as well as developers coming in from many different angles. And I think that's what's important about open source, is you wouldn't be able to get a contribution like that into into a closed source product in the same way.
You mentioned that the contributors come from all over the world, including
Yeah.
Australia. Presumably, this has become a lot easier since the advent of platforms such as GitHub, GitLab. And so these online repositories where everything's in the cloud, all the version control is sort of taken care of. Do you ever worry that code repositories and version control systems will become their own walled gardens? Is this kind of a bit of a trap, do you think, or not something that worries you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I tried to do with Postgres is just plow forwards on Postgres. I mean, I think it's easy to worry too much about some of the things that might happen. I mean, Git is an open source technology and we use it, and it works very well for distributed development. And I think it would be quite hard to pin that down, and the way it's designed. I mean, if you look at what we had before, CVS was so unmanageable. We had a lot of problems with that. So Git is definitely a breath of fresh air, but I don't really see any control issues in the future likely to emerge from that.
Okay, so moving on to a little bit about what EDB does. We are hearing more and more about databases as a service. So can you maybe tell me about the appeal of white glove services around database management, and what do people get for their money?
Yeah, well, I think running databases is somewhat easy, but running robust, fast databases gets progressively harder. So as you try to ensure that your backups are always taken and that you have replication working well, those operational tasks tend to get both hard and expensive. Because as the skill level ramps up, that means you have to have a larger pool of people to operate them. And so what you get with a cloud is all of those operational tasks are either automated or managed by a team of experts. Now, automation itself can cover most of the problems, but you will always need a team of experts behind a cloud service to operate it properly. So what EDB are offering is a cloud service that's managed by true experts rather than people that have just installed and built the product, and then they're just sort of offering it alongside hundreds of other services.
So it could actually save organizations money, I suppose, in that they don't have to hire the skills required to maintain the databases and configure them to exactly their.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at
the you get, or is it more just the convenience factor and the security, the assurance that somebody is really looking after it and knows what they're doing?
Well, I think a lot of businesses have moved away from the sort of build it yourself model, and frequently leasing things is very much the priority for senior management in many companies. And if you can lease a database service that does what you want, then you don't need to hire those experts. You don't need to put up with them being sick or leaving suddenly. And that's really what you get with the cloud services. We're the ones running the database for you, and as a result, you don't need to worry about those concerns. And obviously, what EDB has is a large enough pool of experts that we're not really troubled by somebody being off sick or it being a night or a weekend, because we've got the large enough team to cover that properly.
And what will the new release of Postgres mean for EDB? Obviously, you've been instrumental in creating some of the updates and upgrades. Is that going to roll on to new features that you'll be able to offer, new services?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've architected the EDB cloud completely from the ground up using the latest technology. So rather than using technology that's 10 or 20 years old, we've used the very latest technologies, and as a result, effectively future-proofed what we're going to do. But what's really exciting from our perspective is the amount of adaptation and control that we can get into that system. So as experts in Postgres, we're able to teach this thing to properly dance, not just sort of sit there, unmoving. We can actually add a lot of value in terms of dynamic tuning, the way we respond to certain events automatically. So for me, it's a kind of a dream in terms of being able to add value, because it's as Archimedes said, give me a place to stand and I can move the world. And that's what we are hoping to be able to do with the EDB cloud, is surround the basic service with a lot of value add technology.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left now, so last call for questions. Please do put them into the box if you have anything that you want to know from Simon. Well, we've got him here. I have 1 or 2 more of my own, which I will press on with. So there's a lot of new features in the new version of Postgres, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd have liked to have seen in there that hasn't arrived, or that you think may arrive in the next update or the next edition, or maybe the next point release?
Well, I think so the feature set of Postgres has still got a long way to go. If I made a list of all the things that I would want to do to the database, it's at least 15 years out. And I'm kind of having to come to terms now with the thought that I might not see some of these things done before I retire. But that's a good thing. That means the product's going to be healthy for many years. Now the Postgres comes out 1 year, one release every year. So some of these projects take 3 or 4 years to come to fruition, and that's a good thing, because they then get a lot of review along the way. But obviously, sometimes I've got to admit it is a bit frustrating when you don't get the feature that you really wanted into this version and you have to wait a year. I can't hide it's personally frustrating, right? But when those things happen, it's okay, because you have to say, you're right, we didn't quite get that bit right and we need to rework it, and so yes, it'll be in the next release. So there's various things that we have been working on for a number of years, but they're all going to go in eventually. So we've got new things for the SQL standard. We've got new functionality, replication technology. There's horizontal scalability functionality to go in. So there's just a vast array of things that we have planned to go into Postgres. And I must say, these are things I'm talking about here that we're going to put into open source PostgreSQL. That's what I understood. There will always be value add technology on top of it from both EDB and other companies, but the core PostgreSQL feature set has got many, many years left to run in terms of adapting to modern computing. So for me, it's just as exciting as it was 18 years ago when I started to be involved. In fact, more so, because back then there weren't that many people contributing, whereas now we've probably got 10 times as many contributors now as we did 15, 20 years ago.
That's amazing. That's a real sort of open source success story, which is great to hear. Definitely. Okay, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Simon. That's been really interesting.
Thank you very much.
I hope you've enjoyed it too. The audience, thank you for your only one question, but if you want to get in touch with Simon, he's on LinkedIn and he has a lot of detailed knowledge. So please do get your questions over to him.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that's all we have time for now. So thanks for watching. Bye-bye.